What's really striking is how quickly things have changed. You know, like just a few years ago, the relationship between Russia and the West was, it was strained.
Sure.
But there was at least some predictability to it.
Right.
Now we're in this, what some are calling an existential standoff.
Right.
And the assumptions that both sides had going into this whole thing are being like seriously challenged.
That is what is so interesting about this crisis group report.
Yeah.
They really dig into those miscalculations and how they've shaped where we are right now.
Totally.
For example,
Russia,
it seems like they were banking on a really swift military victory.
Oh, yeah.
Like they just assumed their forces would just overwhelm Ukraine.
Yeah.
They seem to believe that nuclear threats
yeah.
would keep the West from getting involved.
Of course. Yeah.
And on the Western side, there was this initial like optimism, this belief that if they just gave Ukraine enough advanced weapons, that it would just quickly turn the tide. But the reality is that it's a long war.
Yeah.
And it's this brutal war of attrition.
It's a bit of slog.
And that is where Trump's return to the White House just throws everything for a loop.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, his promise to end the war has definitely gotten everyone's attention.
Oh, yeah.
But the IPS Journal piece
Right.
really highlights just how wary European leaders are. They see this as a huge shift in U.S. policy.
Yeah.
Especially with Trump's direct talks with Putin.
Right.
And they see this as potentially really dangerous.
I mean, the concern is that he'll prioritize a quick deal over a sustainable one.
Right.
Like he might make concessions that, make Putin happy in the short term, but ultimately sacrifice Ukraine in the long run. And that undermines European security.
It's almost like Europe is being forced to face this worst case scenario.
Yeah.
A U.S. president who cuts a deal with Putin.
Right.
And then they're left exposed.
Absolutely. And the Atlantic Council piece really captures this urgency.
Yeah.
European nations are scrambling to figure out what to do.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out how to respond.
And, Trump's past actions, especially during his first term, really eroded trust in that transatlantic relationship. His whole America First thing and his skepticism of NATO left a lot of European leaders feeling very unsure about, the U.S.'s commitment to their security.
It's like the ground is shifting under their feet.
Exactly.
And they're trying to find their footing in this new reality.
Yeah.
I remember those really tense moments last year.
Oh, I do.
When Congress almost didn't pass that aid package for Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Russia noticed.
Oh, absolutely.
Those divisions in the West.
That's right. Russia is assuming that Western unity will eventually just crack.
Yeah.
They're hoping that those internal disagreements, particularly in the U.S., will weaken support for Ukraine. Yeah. And that'll create an opening for them to,
to get what they want.
Achieve your goals, yeah.
But the crisis group argues that Russia's miscalculations go way deeper than just banking on Western disunity.
Yeah.
They point to Moscow's continued belief that if they just keep waving around their nukes, that the West will back down.
It's a dangerous game.
It's a dangerous game. Yeah.
It really raises questions about how they see the West and the risks they're willing to take.
This points to a fundamental divide in how they perceive the threats. For Russia, the West is like this existential threat.
Right.
It challenges their security, their identity, and their vision of, regional dominance.
Of course.
And this perception fuels their aggression. And it fuels their willingness to escalate.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the invasion of Ukraine was a brutal wake-up call for most of Europe.
It was.
It shattered any illusion that anyone had about Russia's intentions and forced them to face this reality that maybe they were trying to ignore.
A reality they'd been putting off,
And you can see that shift in their actions.
Oh, yeah.
Countries like Finland and Sweden, who were committed to neutrality forever, rushed to join NATO.
They did.
Those bordering Russia are demanding stronger defenses. They want a more robust NATO presence along their borders.
It's like this war has forced Europe to confront their own vulnerabilities, to rethink how much they rely on the U.S., and to grapple with this possibility of having to defend themselves against a much more assertive and unpredictable Russia.
So you have Russia's miscalculations and Europe's awakening, and they're colliding.
It's like a tectonic shift.
It's a tectonic shift.
In the European security order.
And it's not clear what the landscape will look like when the dust settles.
Not at all.
What's really unsettling is that both sides are working with assumptions that could lead to a dangerous escalation.
Right.
Russia seems to think they can control that escalation ladder using those nuclear threats to, like, intimidate the West.
They think they can manage it. Yeah.
And meanwhile, Europe is trying to figure out how to deter a nuclear-armed Russia while also boosting their own defenses without triggering this, like, spiral.
It's a tough needle to thread.
It's a high-stakes game of brinkmanship. And the consequences, if someone miscalculates, could be catastrophic.
Totally. It's like walking a tightrope over an abyss.
With every step risking a disastrous fall.
The crisis group report acknowledges how serious this is, but they offer some glimmers of hope.
Okay.
They argue that there are paths to a more stable Europe, but those paths require this delicate balance of diplomacy, deterrence, and a willingness to reimagine the whole security architecture of the continent.
So diplomacy,
yes,
but with a credible deterrent behind it.
Absolutely. Diplomacy without that is likely to just fail.
Right. But just building up your military without trying to find diplomatic solutions could just lead to an arms race.
Absolutely. It's about finding the right balance.
So it's a balancing act.
Yes.
It's talking the talk, but also walking the walk.
You got it.
You're showing your strength, showing resolve.
Right.
But you're also signaling that you're willing to negotiate.
Yes.
And you're willing to find ways to de-escalate.
Exactly. Finding the right mix of carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
Pressure and persuasion to create a more stable environment and nudge everyone towards a better relationship.
But as we've been talking about, there are some huge obstacles in the way.
There are.
This war in Ukraine shows no sign of ending.
Right.
The transatlantic alliance is strained.
Definitely.
And European nations are struggling to get past their own internal divisions.
Yeah.
And then there's the elephant in the room, nuclear weapons. It's been in the background of everything we've been talking about, but we can't ignore it.
We can't.
The crisis group report really shines a spotlight on this.
It does.
It highlights how both Russia and the West are wrestling with this whole challenge of nuclear deterrence in this crazy, unpredictable era.
It's a new world.
So you have Russia constantly rattling their sabers, threatening to use their arsenal if they think their interests are threatened.
They feel very strongly about that.
And then you have the West trying to figure out how to deter a nuclear-armed Russia without triggering an escalation. That could lead to
unimaginable consequences.
Unimaginable consequences.
Yeah, it's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see who blinks first.
It's a high-stakes game of chicken.
It is.
And the report points out just how dangerous this has become.
Absolutely.
Even a small nuclear exchange would be devastating. It would have humanitarian consequences, environmental consequences, and it could potentially trigger a global nuclear winter, which could threaten, I mean, all of civilization.
The stakes are incredibly high.
So how do we even start to address this nightmare scenario? What can we do to dial down the risk of a nuclear confrontation?
The crisis group report, while acknowledging how complicated this all is, offer some paths forward. One key recommendation is strengthening those lines of communication between Russia and the West, especially on nuclear issues.
So like what does that look like?
Imagine like dedicated hotlines, exchanging information about, you know, each other's nuclear doctrines and what their posture is like. And even conducting joint exercises to practice, you know, de-escalation procedures.
So you're basically saying pick up the phone and talk. Before things go too far. Make sure there aren't any misunderstandings, no misinterpretations that could lead to, well...
to a catastrophe,
The catastrophe.
Clear communication is essential in a situation this tense.
Absolutely.
Where even a small incident could spiral out of control.
So alongside those communication efforts, the report also emphasizes arms control.
It does.
I mean, is that even realistic right now?
It might seem like a long shot, but there are still areas where both sides have an interest in limiting certain weapons or deployments.
So like what?
Well, extending the New START treaty, for example, that limits the number of strategic nuclear weapons for both the U.S. and Russia. That would be huge. It's set to expire in 2026.
Right.
Renewing it would send a signal that both sides are still committed to arms control, at least at some level.
Yeah.
It could stabilize things and maybe even open the door for more dialogue.
So are there any other areas where they see potential for progress on arms control?
They suggest maybe agreements on limiting the development and deployment of those new super destabilizing nukes.
What do you mean?
Things like, hypersonic missiles, nuclear-powered torpedoes.
Right.
These things increase the risk of an accident or unintended use. They just make everyone feel less safe.
Right. So getting those off the table would be a big win.
Huge.
What about NATO's nuclear posture?
Yeah.
That's been a thorn in Russia's side for ages.
It has.
And it's a sensitive topic for some European countries.
Yeah.
I mean, especially the ones that actually host U.S. nuclear weapons on their own soil.
The report doesn't give any specific recommendations there. They do say that NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements are a major concern for Russia.
Yeah.
They see those weapons as a direct threat.
I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
If the situation was reversed, the West wouldn't be thrilled about Russian nukes right on their border.
Exactly.
And the report suggests that NATO needs to, they need to be sensitive to how Russia feels.
Yeah.
It's not about giving in to them.
Right.
It's about recognizing that their perception matters.
And taking steps to reduce the risk of a miscalculation.
Or an escalation that nobody wants.
Right.
So it's a balancing act.
It is.
Maintaining a strong deterrent.
Yeah.
But also reassuring Russia that those weapons aren't pointed at them and won't be used lightly.
But the report's clear.
Okay.
Diplomacy and arms control.
Yeah.
They're essential, but they're not enough.
Right.
Europe needs a strong defense.
They have to be able to back themselves up.
Right. Relying solely on the U.S. to defend them?
Yeah.
Those days are over.
It's like a coming-of-age moment for Europe.
It is.
They can't just expect the U.S. to bail them out every time something happens.
Nope.
They need to be more self-reliant.
Yeah.
More capable, more assertive.
Absolutely.
When it comes to defending their own interests.
And the report lays out some steps.
Yeah, what do they need to do?
First, they need to increase their defense spending.
Okay.
Most European countries are behind on that.
Right.
They're not hitting that 2% of GDP target.
So pay up, basically.
Pretty much.
But we talked about this before.
We did.
It's not just about spending more.
Yeah, it's about spending it right.
Spending it on the right things.
Yeah, prioritize those investments in capabilities that actually matter.
Like what?
Like cyber warfare.
Okay.
Air and missile defense, intelligence gathering.
Okay.
Long-range precision strikes.
These are the areas where they really need to catch up.
They do. They need to show that they can defend themselves.
What about the European defense industry?
Oh, that's another big one.
Yeah, the crisis group talked about that.
Right now, they rely on the U.S. for a lot of their weapons.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah, I can see that.
Imagine trying to stand up to a bully.
Okay.
When you're using his bat to do it.
Right.
They need to be able to build their own stuff.
So less reliance on the U.S.
Yeah.
More self-sufficiency.
Exactly.
When it comes to those high-tech weapons.
They need to be able to deter Russia on their own.
Okay, so increase spending, fix the defense industry.
And one more thing.
Okay, lay it on me.
They need to streamline their decision-making.
Oh, boy.
When it comes to security.
Yeah.
The EU is slow.
It is.
It's bogged down in bureaucracy.
So much red tape.
They need consensus from 27 countries.
It's a lot.
It's fine for, like, agricultural rules.
Right.
But when there's a crisis, that kind of delay can be fatal.
So they need to move faster.
Yeah.
Be more agile. Be able to react quickly.
Exactly.
But that's easier said than done, right?
It is.
Getting 27 countries to agree on anything.
It's tough.
Especially something as important as defense.
It's like herding cats.
It is, but the crisis group says if the EU wants to be taken seriously, they have to figure this out.
They do.
They have to find a way to be more decisive.
Right.
So a more powerful EU.
Yeah.
One that can act quickly when it needs to.
This is a very different EU than what we're used to.
It really makes you wonder.
It does.
What kind of Europe will come out of all this?
It's not just about Europe, though.
Right.
The choices they make will affect everyone.
The whole world.
The war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The U.S. stepping back, China rising.
Yeah.
The world is becoming more unstable.
It feels like we're at a crossroads.
We are.
The old rules don't apply anymore.
Yeah. The old alliances are falling apart. The things we used to be sure of, they're gone.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
And terrifying.
It is. The crisis group reminds us.
Yeah.
We can't just sit back.
We can't
let this happen.
We need to be involved.
We need to be informed.
Yeah.
We need to be pushing for solutions.
Absolutely.
Solutions that make the world safer.
For everyone.
So what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is that we can make a difference.
Right.
We're not powerless.
Right.
The decisions we make in the next few years, they will shape the future.
They will.
Our voices matter.
Our actions matter.
Right.
The future isn't set in stone.
Yeah.
We create it.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
There's hope in all this uncertainty.
There is. They also recommend thinking about those sanctions.
Oh, right. The economic sanctions.
Yeah. You know, the ones on Russia?
Do they think we should just lift them?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
It's more nuanced.
So what are they saying?
They argue that some sanctions, the ones that target individuals or like sectors that aren't directly related to the war, those could be eased
as part of
a bigger diplomatic process.
So using sanctions relief as like a bargaining chip.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, there have to be strings attached, right?
Of course. It's not about rewarding bad behavior.
Right.
It's about making it clear that if Russia takes concrete actions, then the pressure will ease up.
So what kind of actions are we talking about?
Things like withdrawing troops.
Okay.
Adhering to ceasefires.
Right.
Engaging in good faith negotiations.
So they have to show they're serious.
Yeah, those actions could trigger a gradual lifting of some sanctions.
So Putin doesn't get off easy.
No freebies.
Any relief has to be earned.
Absolutely.
And we could always put those sanctions back in place.
Exactly. If they don't keep their word.
It's a risky strategy.
It is.
But the report says the potential payoff could be huge.
It could.
We could actually de-escalate this conflict.
Yeah.
And move towards a more stable relationship with Russia.
It's a gamble.
It is.
But it might be worth taking.
All of this is so complex.
It is.
It's like trying to navigate this geopolitical minefield with all these different players.
So many competing interests.
Yeah.
And the constant risk that everything could just blow up. It can feel overwhelming.
It really can.
But the crisis group's point is the stakes are too high to ignore diplomacy.
No matter how hard it might be.
Oh, exactly.
They're not naive, though.
No.
They know that Russia's goals might not line up with a stable Europe.
They might not be compatible.
And they say any diplomatic efforts have to be backed up by a credible deterrent.
Absolutely. Europe has to be ready to defend itself.
If diplomacy fails.
Exactly.
And that's where the internal debate within Europe becomes so important.
It really does.
The Atlantic Council piece lays out all the different approaches being considered. Each country trying to balance their immediate needs with their long-term goals.
So it's not just Europe as this like single entity.
No.
It's all these different countries.
27 of them.
With their own histories, their own interests, their own calculations.
They each have their own perspective.
Like France.
Okay.
They're pushing for strategic autonomy.
Right.
That's a term we hear a lot.
It is.
But what does it actually mean?
It means Europe taking responsibility for its own security.
Okay.
Being able to act without relying on the U.S.
Interesting.
It's a vision of Europe with a strong military.
Its own foreign policy agenda.
Okay.
And the ability to like project power on the world stage.
That's a big change from how things are now.
Yeah.
Europe has been under the U.S. security umbrella for decades.
For a long time. And France sees this crisis as a chance to change that.
Okay.
They want the EU to be a real geopolitical force.
Wow.
Able to act on its own.
Even without the U.S.
Exactly.
But we talked about this before.
We did.
France is facing pushback from other EU members who aren't so keen on this whole new security role.
Like Germany.
Germany's got a lot to think about.
Right.
Their history, their economic ties with Russia.
Right.
And they're really hesitant to get involved militarily.
So even though they've stepped up their support for Ukraine, the idea of sending German troops to like enforce a peace deal, that's a really sensitive issue.
It is.
Because like they're stuck.
Yeah.
They want to support Ukraine.
They want to deter Russia. But they're not ready to be the leader.
That France wants them to be.
Not yet.
And then you have Poland and the Baltic states.
Right.
They're right on the front line with Russia.
Yeah.
They're pushing for a much harder line.
They want a stronger response.
They want more military spending.
Absolutely.
The permanent NATO presence on their borders.
Yeah.
even direct military support for Ukraine.
They want to send a message.
So you have this whole range of opinions.
You do.
Some want to lead. Some are hesitant.
Yeah.
Some want to get tough.
It's a mixed bag.
How does the EU deal with all this internal tension?
The Atlantic Council piece suggests you're still trying to figure out a unified response.
Okay.
They all agree.
On what?
They agree that Ukraine needs support.
Okay.
And they agree that Russia needs to be deterred. But the details.
The devil is in the details.
How far are they willing to go?
Exactly.
How much will they spend? What are they willing to sacrifice?
Those are the questions dividing them.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It could be.
How can they come up with a strategy when they're so divided?
The EU's history is full of these moments where disagreements have stopped them from acting.
But they have also shown
that
they can overcome these things. When
they're facing a real threat.
An existential threat.
Exactly. And this might be one of those times.
Okay, but let's say they can get it together. Can the EU actually fill the void?
That's the big question.
If the U.S. steps back,
I mean,
they're not exactly known for their military power.
That's what everyone's debating right now.
So what do they need?
Well, the EU has taken some small steps
Towards a what?
Towards a more integrated defense policy.
But they have a long way to go.
They do.
Before they can really deter a country like Russia. So what are they missing?
The Atlantic Council piece points to 3 key areas where they need to improve.
Lay it on me.
First, they need to spend more on defense.
Okay, that's a familiar one.
Most EU countries aren't meeting that 2% of GDP target.
They got to put their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. But it's not just about spending more.
Right.
It's about spending it wisely.
Smart spending.
Investing in the right capabilities.
The things that actually matter.
The things that will help them in this current situation.
Okay, what's the second area?
They need to build a better European defense industry.
Right. That's what we were talking about earlier.
They're too reliant on the U.S. for weapons.
Yeah.
That makes them vulnerable.
It does.
Especially now.
Right, with how tense things are.
They need to be able to produce their own advanced weapons.
So they're not dependent on the U.S.
Exactly.
That means more cooperation between EU countries, pooling resources, sharing expertise, standardizing equipment.
It's about creating a European defense ecosystem.
One that can stand on its own.
But European defense cooperation, it has a long and complicated history.
It does.
So why should we think they can do it now?
Good question.
I think the threat from Russia is real.
It is.
And the U.S. might not always be there.
So they're feeling the pressure.
Yeah. This might be the push they need.
To finally get their act together.
It might be.
Okay, so increase spending, fix the defense industry.
And improve their decision-making process.
Oh, right, that whole bureaucracy thing.
The EU is slow.
It is.
It takes them forever to decide anything.
They need 27 countries to agree.
Right.
That doesn't work in a crisis.
It doesn't.
They need to be faster, more agile,
more
responsive.
It's essential.
But how do they do that?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
The crisis group says they have to overcome this culture.
Of what?
Of endless debate and consensus seeking.
Right.
They need to give the EU more authority.
On what?
On defense and foreign policy.
So they can act quickly when they need to.
Exactly.
Let's recap.
Okay.
The crisis group wants a diplomatic solution. They're talking about communication, arms control, strategic sanctions relief.
And the Atlantic Council is focused on those internal challenges.
Right.
They want increased spending, a better defense industry, faster decision-making.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, it is.
You can't have one without the other.
Diplomacy without a strong defense is meaningless.
And building up your military without trying to talk things out could just make things worse.
It's about finding the right balance.
Carrots and sticks.
Right.
Pressure and persuasion.
Yeah.
To create a more stable world.
But there are so many obstacles.
There are.
The war is not ending.
Nope.
The U.S. and Europe are drifting apart.
Yeah.
And European countries can't seem to agree on anything. It's a mess.
It's a challenging situation.
It feels like we're on the edge of something big.
We are.
The old world is gone.
It is.
And the new one is still taking shape. And it's scary.
It can be.
But it's also exciting.
It is.
Because we have the chance to shape that new world.
So to our listeners out there, what are your thoughts?
What stood out to you?
What are you still thinking about?
Join the conversation in the comments.
Let's keep talking about these important issues.
And don't forget
to subscribe
to the channel
for more deep dives into the topics shaping our world.